I was sitting in my office in Santa Fe just before Christmas, watching a video playing in the middle of the living room, where my son-in-law struck his wife right in front of their small child, while his own mother threw a full glass of red wine straight onto the little girl, all while the Christmas lights around them kept blinking steadily as if nothing were wrong. And the humiliation was not in the blow or the insult, but in the moment. I realized that all of it had happened under a roof titled in my name, inside a space I had once given with complete trust. I'm a father, and I knew what I had to do to protect my daughter. If you have ever been treated like a stranger by your own family, ever swallowed humiliation just to keep a meal or a holiday peaceful, stay with this story, and if it speaks to you, leave a dot in the comments to let me know where you're listening from, because sometimes what makes a person stand up is not anger, but the moment the truth is dragged into the light, where there is nowhere left to hide. I was in Santa Fe when the call came. Late December was cold and dry, pale sunlight slanting through the office window and falling across the neatly stacked papers in front of me. I was reviewing an ethics report for an old client, the kind of work I had done for years, familiar enough that I could spot mistakes at a glance. The numbers sat still, the lines aligned, everything orderly in the way I trusted. The phone vibrated softly on the desk. Rachel's name appeared. My daughter. I answered immediately. I'm here. Rachel's voice came through clear and measured, as if rehearsed. Dad, I'm calling to ask, could you come have Christmas dinner with us? The question sounded normal, but the rhythm did not. Rachel usually rambled, usually circled, and usually asked a dozen things before getting to the point. This time she went straight to it, no preamble, no hesitation. I set my pen down and listened more closely. I'm in Santa Fe, I said. I still have a few files to finish. I probably won't make it. There was silence on the line for a moment. Not long, but long enough for me to sense something being held back. I know, Rachel said. Her voice stayed even. You're always busy. The words were light, but they had an edge. I frowned. Is something wrong? No, she answered too quickly. Everything's fine. It's just Lily really wants to see you. Hearing my granddaughter's name made my chest tighten slightly. Lily was 6 years old this year, curious, quick to laugh, and always insisting that I read the same storybook again every time I visited. I glanced at the small photo beside my computer, 3 generations captured last summer, Lily standing in the middle, her hand gripping my finger. Is she doing well? I asked. She's fine, Rachel said. She's playing in her room. Just then a man's voice cut in, loud enough for me to hear even though it wasn't directed at the phone. Lily, go somewhere else. The tone was curt, not harsh, but impatient. I recognized Jason's voice, Rachel's husband. I waited for Rachel to say something. There was no response. Just a few seconds of silence. Then my daughter spoke again, her voice still holding that strangely steady rhythm. Dad, don't worry. We're about to have dinner. I was about to say more, but Jason spoke again, and this time clearly aimed at the phone. You should just focus on your work. We're used to handling things ourselves. The words were released with a soft chuckle, not a joyful laugh, but a short sound that carried disdain. I tightened my grip on the phone. Jason, I said, keeping my voice low and slow. I was just checking in. Of course, he replied. It's just that we've learned to deal with things on our own. The sentence landed clearly without emphasis. No one raised their voice, no one argued, but I heard what was being set down between us. A boundary. Rachel did not object. She did not laugh it off. There was only silence. I switched the phone to my other hand and leaned back in my chair. Rachel, I said, my daughter's name. Are you sure everything's okay? Another pause. This one is longer. Yes, she said finally. It's fine, Dad. Really? Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't break, but it wasn't warm either. I nodded, even though I knew she couldn't see me. All right, then pass my Christmas wishes on to Lily. Tell her I'll make it up to her later. Okay, Rachel said. I will. I waited for a question in return, a plea. Nothing came. You should get back to work, she said. I'm hanging up now. The call ended cleanly. The screen went dark. The room returned to its quiet, broken only by the steady hum of the heater below. I sat still for a moment, my hand resting on the desk. The first feeling was not anger. It wasn't sadness either. It was like walking into a familiar house and realizing something had been moved, even if you couldn't yet tell what it was. Jason had never been close to me, but before, he knew how to keep up appearances. Smooth words, measured manners, just enough to avoid discomfort. Today was different, not aggressive, not loud, but deliberate, as if he wanted to remind me that I was no longer at the center. I looked back at the stack of files in front of me. The lines of text suddenly lost their sharpness. I flipped to another page, but my eyes couldn't follow. In my head, Rachel's voice replayed, steady, contained, leaving no openings. I wondered when my daughter had started speaking to me like that. The last time I visited Fort Collins was Thanksgiving. Rachel wore long sleeves, even though the house was warm. Lily hugged me, then quickly let go when Jason entered the room. I had thought it was just a coincidence. I always believed everything had a reasonable explanation. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, a neighboring family was hanging lights along their porch. A child ran around laughing. The adults stood behind, working and reminding. A normal scene. I turned back to my desk and arranged the papers more neatly than before. The familiar motion helped steady my breathing. I had always believed in order, believed that if you kept everything tidy, whatever was out of place would eventually reveal itself. But this time, the disorder wasn't on the page. It was in the way my daughter answered, in my granddaughter being told to go somewhere else, in the words of the man who had entered my family and declared that they no longer needed me. I understood that feeling all too well, not being pushed out by force or harsh words, but by polite coldness, by being made to feel unnecessary. I turned off the desk lamp and put on my coat. Work could wait. Some things, once they appeared, could not be unheard. That night was December 23rd, only one day before Christmas, but I felt one thing with complete clarity. I was standing at the edge of a story where I should have been right at the center. After that phone call that night, I couldn't return to my old work rhythm. I stayed seated at the desk a while longer, staring at pages so familiar I didn't need to read them to know what was written there. Everything was still in its proper place. Only my mind had drifted elsewhere. I began to remember, not in a jumbled way, but as small fragments, appearing one by one, lining up as if waiting to be called by name. The first image was of Lily. That day I was standing in my daughter's kitchen in Fort Collins. Rachel was setting the table while I bent down to retie Lily's shoelaces. She was talkative, asking me all kinds of things, from whether it snowed in Santa Fe to whether the neighbor's cat still climbed over the fence. I was halfway through answering when Jason walked in from the living room. "Lily?" He didn't shout, just raised his voice slightly above normal. The girl flinched, not the way children usually do when they're suddenly called, but with a quick, almost instantaneous reflex, drawing herself in. Lily stood up straight, arms falling to her sides, completely silent. I remember that moment clearly because it didn't fit a 6-year-old who was usually running around and talking back. I had reassured myself that maybe she was just tired. Every child has moments of sensitivity. The next image was of Rachel. Last summer, I visited her family in mid-July. The sun was harsh, the air heavy, the ceiling fan spinning constantly, yet never enough to cool the room. And yet Rachel was wearing long sleeves, not a light sun-protective shirt, but thick fabric, sleeves pulled all the way down to her wrists. "Aren't you hot?" I asked. Rachel smiled and tugged the sleeve up slightly. "I'm used to it." I didn't press further. She was grown, had her own family, and had the right to choose how she dressed. I reminded myself not to pry into small things. Now, thinking back, I'm not sure it was a small thing. Then there was the bruise. It was the afternoon before I returned to Santa Fe. Rachel walked me to the door. When she reached for my coat, her sleeve shifted a bit higher. I saw a patch of discolored skin on her wrist. Not large, but clear. Purple mixed with yellow, like a bruise a few days old. "What happened to you?" I asked. Rachel followed my gaze, then pulled her sleeve back down. "I bumped into the edge of a cabinet." The answer came quickly, smoothly, without hesitation. I nodded. I chose to believe it, not because I didn't sense something was off, but because I didn't want to face the alternative. Believing my daughter was easier than admitting my intuition was trying to tell me something deeply uncomfortable. I even remember thinking, if something were truly serious, Rachel would say something. She had always told me everything since she was little. I forgot one very simple thing. When people are forced into silence long enough, they learn how to say things that sound perfectly fine, even when nothing inside is fine at all. That night, after the Christmas call, those images connected. They were no longer scattered, no longer harmless details. They formed a straight line I had seen before and deliberately turned away from. I stood up and paced the room, not fast, not slow. Each step felt heavier than the last. Guilt didn't crash down all at once. It spread gradually, like realizing you missed an important traffic sign, and now there's no way back. My phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. I opened it. "Sir, I recorded something tonight. You need to see it." The sender's name appeared below. Daniel Price. Daniel was the neighbor across the street from Rachel's house, a former police officer retired for several years. We'd met only a handful of times, enough to exchange greetings, enough to know he was observant and spoke little. I read the message again, just 2 sentences, no explanation, no emotion. I checked the time. Nearly 10 o'clock at night. In my head, every sound seemed muted. I sat back down, placed the phone on the desk, and stared at it for a few seconds before touching the screen. At that moment, I still didn't know what I was about to see, but I understood one thing very clearly. Everything I had ignored for so long had finally found a way to speak for itself, and once it had begun to speak, I would no longer have the right to pretend I had never heard it. Daniel's message arrived less than a minute later. No long explanation, just a forwarded email, blank subject line containing 3 things: a video file, a screenshot of the original metadata, and 1 short sentence. Original file, unedited. I kept a copy. I opened my laptop, set my phone aside, closed the door. Familiar motions, slower than usual, as if I were preparing to review a work file. Except this. Time. The name in that file was my daughter's. The video loaded more slowly than I expected. The progress bar crept forward bit by bit. I watched the percentage tick upward, the weight in my chest growing heavier, my own heartbeat loud in my ears. When the image finally appeared, I recognized the kitchen immediately. The kitchen where I had chosen every cabinet handle myself. The kitchen where Rachel used to stand smiling, making coffee for me every morning when I visited. The overhead lights were bright white. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, its lights blinking steadily, a scene far too familiar to hide what was about to happen. Rachel stood near the sink, holding a plate of food. Jason was across from her. The sound wasn't on yet, but I could see his mouth moving. His face was tight, jaw clenched, the look I'd seen before on people who use their voices to pin others down. I reached for the trackpad and turned the sound on. "How many times have I told you?" Jason's voice came through, rough and sharp. "Why do you always screw it up?" Rachel replied, her voice small. I couldn't make out every word, only the submission that had become instinct, the way she angled her body, shoulders slightly hunched, the posture of someone always ready to apologize, even when she's done nothing wrong. Then Jason stepped forward. No warning, no pause. The distance between them vanished in a single breath. The slap came fast. No build-up. His hand swung and connected squarely with Rachel's face. The sound cracked through the kitchen, dry, clean, precise, like muscle memory. Her head snapped to the side. The plate slipped from her hand, hit the floor, and broke cleanly in two. I sat frozen. In that moment, I couldn't breathe out. Not because of a heart attack, but because I understood this was not the first time. Rachel staggered back, and just when I thought it couldn't go any lower, that was when Carol. She stood up from the dining table, a glass of red wine in her hand. No rush, no panic. Her face was cold, eyes sharp, the posture of someone who had already decided which side she was on. She walked over, looked Rachel up and down, then poured the entire glass of wine straight onto my daughter's face. The dark red liquid ran through her hair, down her neck, soaking into her dress. Carol said one sentence, slow and clear, "You always ruin everything." That line wasn't a reprimand. It was a green light for whatever came next. In the corner of the frame, I saw Lily. She stood pressed against the wall, both hands over her head. Her mouth was open, but the cry caught in her throat. Then Lily screamed, her voice breaking. "Mom!" That cry didn't land as sound. It slammed straight into my chest, like someone reaching inside and squeezing my heart. I turned the video off, then turned it back on. The second time, I watched more carefully. I studied the camera position, fixed angle, no shaking. I noted the lighting. The clock on the microwave is showing the time. I watched Jason's hand. I watched the way Carol tilted her wrist as she threw the wine. I watched Rachel's flinch, the kind that only appears when a body has already learned how to avoid a blow. The third time, I wasn't watching with emotion anymore. I watched like someone who has worked with truth for years. I watched the timing, distance, sequence. Every detail sat there clear and unmoving, leaving no room to twist it. No edits, no misunderstanding. This was abuse. After the third viewing, I closed the laptop. Both hands rested on my thighs. I realized I was shaking, not violently. Small, steady tremors, as if my body were holding me in place to keep me from springing up and doing something stupid. I didn't cry. The first feeling wasn't anger. It was a shame. Shame that I had been too far away. Shame that I had heard my daughter's voice tremble on the phone and still told myself everything was fine. Shame that I had chosen my own convenience over my child's safety. That feeling passed quickly. What replaced it wasn't hot. It was cold, clean, sharp. I opened Daniel's email again. The metadata was all there. Date, time, device, original format. I understood exactly why he'd sent this. This wasn't meant to hurt me. It was meant to make me act. After the third viewing, I finally called Daniel. "I've seen it," I said. The line was silent for a few seconds, long enough for me to know he was weighing every word. "I'm sorry I had to send you that," Daniel said, his voice dropping. "How did you record it?" I asked. "From my house," Daniel said, "through the kitchen window. I heard shouting first. When I looked over, it was already happening. I barely had time to hit record." I nodded slightly, even though I knew he couldn't see me. "You did the right thing," I said. "If you'd turned away, that's what I wouldn't have been able to live with." The call ended. I held the phone for a moment longer, the screen dark, my hand still not letting go. The contacts list was open in front of me. Jason's name, Carol's name, Rachel's name. I didn't call, not because I hesitated, but because I knew that if I spoke now, they'd have time to clean up the traces. I'd seen too many people use the first few minutes to turn themselves into victims. I stood up and put on my coat. Everything in my head had locked into place. Not in a rush of fury, but in a clarity so cold it was almost painful. The only state that keeps a father from destroying his chance to protect his child. That night I didn't say another word to anyone, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. From this moment on, silence was no longer avoidance. It was the first step of a plan that would force them to face exactly what they had done. And I had decided this would not end quietly. The next step was preparation. I opened my laptop and logged into the storage system. The cameras in the Fort Collins House were configured to record video only, no audio. Notices about video recording had been posted at the entrance and along the hallway from the beginning. I did that the moment the system was installed, not out of suspicion, but because I have always believed that anything involving privacy must be explicit. Every clip carried timestamps, location, and recording device information. Nothing missing, nothing extra. I did not open anything else. I only checked the integrity of the data, confirming that no files had been overwritten or corrupted. Then came the paperwork. I took the document folder out of the safe. Inside were notarized copies of the house deed, the family trust records, major repair invoices from the past 3 years, and a cost summary spreadsheet I had compiled myself. I was used to keeping everything in order. When needed, I could pull out the exact page, the exact line. I photographed everything, saved it in a separate folder, set a password, then created an additional backup. Not because I feared losing it, but because I would not allow any margin for error at this point. Only after that did I begin packing. I did not take much. A change of clothes, personal identification, my computer, and my phone fully charged. I did not know how long I would be in Fort Collins, but I knew I had to be ready for every scenario. The night flight from Santa Fe to Denver was almost full. I sat by the window. The cabin lights dimmed. Outside, the city fell away, lights scattering like small dots. I did not sleep. I used the time to reorganize everything in my head, the way I do before entering a difficult mediation session. I arrived in Denver well past midnight. I picked up a rental car at the airport. I did not stop to eat. I did not call anyone. I drove straight north. The highway was empty. It was cold. The windshield fogged slightly. I kept a steady speed, not above the limit, not because I was afraid of being pulled over, but because I needed a clear head until the very end. When I turned into the familiar neighborhood in Fort Collins, I turned off the music. I wanted to hear everything, including the silence. The house appeared ahead. The living room lights were still on. Light spilled through the curtains, enough to see a human figure moving inside. I parked across the street. I did not get out right away. I sat there, hands on the steering wheel, looking at that house. The place where I once believed my daughter was living a normal life. The place was now lit up in the middle of the night, as if nothing had just happened. I understood very clearly the urge to rush straight in, to pull my child out immediately. But I also understood what would happen if I did that. They would have grounds to say I was causing trouble, that I was trespassing, that I had disrupted everything before authorities could verify the facts. Not every battle is won with the first strike. There are fights where acting one beat too early only weakens your position. I opened the car door, stepped out, and stood by the roadside for a moment. Cold wind slipped through my collar. I took a long breath and let the sensation keep me grounded. I did not go into the house that night. I chose to wait for the right moment, when the truth would have enough space to stand upright, and when the people inside would have no room left to maneuver. The lights inside were still on. The curtains were not fully drawn. I dialed 911 in Fort Collins. I did not say much. I did not tell the story like a panicked father. I presented exactly what they needed to hear. I want to report a case of domestic abuse. The victim is my daughter. I have original video footage with timestamps and camera angles. The current address is... The dispatcher asked several verification questions. I answered each one slowly and clearly. No speculation, no labels, just facts. Are the suspects present at the scene? Yes. Are there children in the house? Yes. The voice on the other end hardened. I knew I had hit the core issue. We are dispatching units to check it out. Please preserve the evidence and avoid confrontation. Please keep your distance. I looked at my watch. How long? A few minutes. I ended the call and waited one more beat. Only after I knew the police were already on their way did I cross the street and enter the garage. Not to confront them, but to be present when they arrived. The lights inside the house were still on, like every other night, warm enough to make someone forget that there were things inside that should never exist. Jason turned when he heard footsteps. Carol jumped to her feet as well. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jason spoke first, his voice snapping out with the reflex of a man who always believed he held the upper hand. I didn't answer right away. I checked my watch, then looked straight at him. "You have 4 minutes," I said evenly, without raising my voice. 4 minutes to apologize to my daughter and my granddaughter. Right here. I called 911. I know the police are coming, and I want to hear you say it before everything becomes part of a record. Jason scoffed. "What nonsense are you talking about? This is my house." I stepped forward one more pace, stopping at just the right distance so he could see my eyes clearly. "I'm not talking nonsense," I said, "because you know exactly what you did, and you know I've seen it." I placed my phone on the glass table in front of everyone, the screen already unlocked, logged into the archive of the security cameras of the house under my name. I had seen enough to know exactly what had happened inside these walls. I tapped the screen. The large television in the living room lit up. The first image was the kitchen. Jason stood in the middle of the room, shoulders tight. His hand slammed down hard on the table. The tabletop shook, items slid, clear enough that even someone watching from outside could feel the force packed into that blow. Rachel stepped back, her back hitting the refrigerator. Her hands came up by instinct, not to fight back, but to shield herself. At the edge of the frame, Lily appeared. The child clutched a stuffed animal tight to her chest. Her body curled inward, eyes wide. No crying, no screaming. Just standing there, as if moving would only make everything worse. The image changed. Carol stood close to Rachel, her mouth moving quickly. You couldn't hear every word, but it was obvious to anyone watching that this was not advice. Jason stood behind them, arms crossed, looking down. His gaze was cold, unhurried, as if waiting for an outcome that was meant to happen. The next clip played. Jason leaned in close to Rachel, the distance down to just a few inches. His voice dropped, but it was tight and sharp. Rachel stood frozen, both hands gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. Lily stood in the doorway, one foot lifting and then stopping, caught between going and staying. Jason lunged toward the television. I raised my hand. I didn't touch him. I only signaled. "Sit down." He stopped short, not because I was loud, but because he understood he had lost control the moment the footage appeared. "You were spying on us?" Carol asked, her voice shaking as she tried to hold on to defiance. "I store what happens in the house under my name," I replied. "There are notices. There are timestamps. There are backups." I glanced at my watch. 2 minutes left. Jason started talking fast, his words tripping over each other. "Thomas, listen to me. This can be worked out. I'm sorry, I'd been drinking." "Stop," I cut in. "Don't apologize to me." I switched to another clip. On the screen, Jason spun around and pointed down the hallway. "Lily, go to your room." The child didn't move. Jason took another step forward. His voice rose. "I told you, go to your room." Lily looked at him, then turned her gaze to me. That look was no longer fear. It was the moment a child realizes the adult in front of her can no longer hide anything. I spoke slowly, each word dropping into the room. "She saw everything, Jason, not just tonight." Jason turned toward me. This time his voice broke completely. "What do you want?" I checked my watch again. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer by the second. "Time's up." The sirens stopped, right in front of the house. Blue and red lights swept across the glass windows, reflecting on the faces standing in the living room. Every movement slowed in that instant, as if everyone understood that a line had just been crossed. 2 police officers stepped inside, hands near their belts, voices firm but not harsh. The body cameras mounted on their chests were already on, small green lights blinking steadily. "Who made the call?" "I did," I answered, stepping aside. "The homeowner." There are children in the house. There is original video. They entered with the practiced rhythm of officers who had done this many times before. The body cameras recorded everything without the need for repeated verbal reminders. One officer raised a hand, dividing the room into separate zones. We're going to separate everyone. Jason was told to stand to the left. Carol was led in the opposite direction. The distance was enough that they could not see each other. Rachel was asked to sit in an armchair near the window. Lily stood tucked behind her mother, both arms still wrapped around a worn stuffed animal. "Are you hurt?" the female officer asked Rachel, her voice slow and clear. Rachel nodded. She gently pulled up her sleeve, revealing a bruise darkening on her arm. Her lower lip was swollen, a small cut already dried with blood. She spoke briefly, each sentence fragmented but precise. No rambling, no embellishment, just exactly what had happened. Daniel Price appeared at the front door, phone in hand. He handed it directly to the police. "This is the original file," Daniel said, "recorded from my house. It has time and location data. I sent a copy to Mr. Thomas right then." The officers took the phone and checked quickly. One nodded and signaled to the other. "We'll take your statement later." Jason leaned against the wall, trying to maintain a calm appearance, but his eyes kept darting toward Lily. When an officer asked him to place his hands on the table for a check, he hesitated for half a beat. "It was just a misunderstanding," Jason said. "A family argument." "You'll speak later," the officer cut him off. "For now, remain silent." The body camera captured everything. Every small gesture, every sentence cut short. There was no space left for interpretation. The female officer turned to me. "Do you have a camera system in the house?" "I do," I replied, "with notifications. Cloud storage. I prepared access." I handed over my phone. She took it, reviewed a few flagged clips. Her expression changed, not shocked, but more severe. "Thank you." After everyone had been separated and statements recorded, one officer stepped outside to make a call. I caught fragments of familiar terms: judge on call, emergency order, children present. About 20 minutes later, he returned. "We've reached the on-call judge," he said. "Based on the video, the statements, and the condition of the scene, an emergency protective order has been signed." He read each provision clearly. Jason was not permitted to approach Rachel and Lily within the specified distance. He had to leave the house immediately, that very night. All contact was to go through attorneys. Jason let out a dry laugh. "On Christmas Eve, you people—" The metallic sound rang out as the handcuffs snapped shut. "You are being detained," the officer said, "in front of your daughter. I advise you to remain silent." Lily looked up. She did not cry. She did not ask questions. She watched the scene, then turned and clutched her mother's hand more tightly. Carol stood in the corner of the room, lips pressed together. When the officer read the order applying to her as well, her shoulders sagged. The sharp words were gone, replaced by a visible emptiness. Jason was led outside. The patrol car lights reflected off the handcuffs. The body camera kept recording. The door closed behind him, this time from the outside. Inside the house, the air settled. Rachel exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for far too long. An officer handed her a thin blanket and gave a few necessary instructions for the night. "We'll be following this case closely," he said. "Someone will contact you tomorrow." I stood still, looking at the room. Everything was still there, but the order had changed. Not because I raised my voice, but because what happened had finally been called by its proper name. Justice is not loud. It arrives through procedure, through paperwork, through recordings that cannot be denied. And that night, in front of a child, it stood exactly where it belonged. The first night passed in a strange apartment, not because it lacked comfort, but because none of us were used to the feeling of being safe. Lily slept fitfully, jolting awake in the middle of the night, calling for her mother. Rachel lay beside her, one hand resting on the child's back, as if letting go would cause everything to snap back to how it was before. I sat in the living room until nearly dawn, not letting my thoughts spiral, just putting my mind back in order. When the sky began to lighten, I knew I had to start in the most familiar way. Break the work down, put the right people in the right places. Move step by step. I didn't call a lawyer right away. I called Rachel first. "Are you okay?" "Better than last night," she replied, her voice still hoarse. "I'm going to take care of a few things today, not for revenge, to close every door that might pull you back." She was silent for a moment, then said, "Do what you need to do." That answer was enough. In the morning, I went to the office earlier than usual. The room was quiet, the light just right. I reopened all the files from the night before, this time not to react, but to set priorities. The first matter involved abuse. I didn't choose a stranger. Rebecca Lawson had appeared in a case I mediated a few years back. At the time, she represented a wife who was being beaten, but still wanted to keep the family together. Rebecca didn't persuade. She only asked the exact question that needed to be asked. In the end, her client chose to take matters into her own hands. I sent a brief email, no long explanations, just attached the video and the emergency protection order. Rebecca replied after 15 minutes, "I've watched it, 9 o'clock. She arrived on time. She didn't bring much paperwork, just a thin notebook. We didn't make small talk. I played the video. She watched it all, from beginning to end, without stopping. "This isn't a one-time incident," Rebecca said as she closed her notebook. "It's a pattern. We'll build the case that way." I asked, "How long can we hold the protection order?" "Long enough for you to handle the rest?" The rest was the house. At noon, I met Andrew Cole. Not our first time working together. Andrew only believes in black and white on paper, and that was exactly what I needed. I didn't tell him any family stories. I handed him the property file. He flipped through each page, nodding to his own internal rhythm. "No lease agreement, no transfer, no residency rights," Andrew said. "Legally, they're staying there by permission." "Do we need to move fast?" I asked. Andrew shook his head. "No need to rush. Let everything follow the proper path. When they realize they no longer have a foothold, they'll unravel on their own." I liked the way he used the word, "on their own." As evening fell, I returned to the office. The third blade didn't require a lawyer. It was buried in the numbers Jason had left behind, sloppy and careless. I opened each statement, each commission report, each advance payment. I didn't conclude. I just marked them. Not to strike yet, but to know exactly when to press. That night, Rachel called again. "Who did you meet today?" "I put the right people in place." "So how long until it's over?" I leaned back in my chair, looking at the 3 files laid out side by side on my desk. "It takes time," I said, "but it will end cleanly." She let out a soft breath. I needed to hear that. I hung up. Everything was set where it needed to be. No need to hurry. Once the law was in motion, all that remained was to wait for the result. 2 weeks after the night the police came to the house, the first hearing was held. I arrived 15 minutes before the doors opened, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to see the room while it was still empty. Straight rows of wooden benches, cold white fluorescent lights, and the smell of old paper and metal. A place with no room for emotion, only files and testimony. Rachel arrived a few minutes after me. She wore a dark coat, her hand gripping the strap of her bag tightly. Lily walked beside her, slower, her eyes constantly scanning the room. I bent down and quietly told the girl that today she only needed to sit still and listen to the adults talk. Lily nodded and did not ask anything else. When the courtroom doors opened, people gradually filed in. Some were there simply to resolve their own matters. Others were unfamiliar faces who lingered longer than usual, curiosity in their eyes. Domestic violence hearings always draw attention, even if no one says it out loud. Jason was brought in through the side door. His shirt was wrinkled with faint red, marks visible on his wrists. He sat at the defendant's table, his back unnaturally straight. as if trying to maintain a posture he had long used to intimidate others. Carol sat behind him, one row back. She stared straight ahead, lips pressed tight. The judge entered. The room stood and sat at her signal. Her voice was even, neither raised nor lowered, as if this were just one file among hundreds. But for those present, it was a moment with no turning back. The prosecutor presented the case briefly. No rambling, no emotion, only references to evidence. When the large screen was turned on, the atmosphere in the room shifted noticeably. The video appeared, the familiar kitchen. Jason came into frame. His voice rang out through the speakers, no longer distant. A few people in the back row inhaled sharply. When the slap happened, the sound was so clear that everyone knew it was not a momentary lapse. Jason lowered his head. His hands rested on the table, fingers clenched tight. He did not look at the screen. He did not look at Rachel. He did not look at anyone. When it reached the part where Carol threw the alcohol, a low murmur spread. A woman at the back of the room shook her head. Lily edged closer to her mother. Rachel placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, gentle but firm. The video ended. No one spoke for several seconds. The silence was not from a lack of words, but because everything had already been said. The judge looked down at the file, then up. The emergency protective order remains in effect, she read evenly. The defendant is prohibited from approaching the victim and the involved child. She moved on point by point. Ownership of the house, the name on the title, residency without a contract. Each sentence read out loud closed off another claim Jason had tried to deny. When it came to bail, the room tightened. The amount was read out, higher than average. Jason lifted his head for the first time since entering the courtroom. The defendant poses a risk of reoffending, the judge said, and shows signs of witness interference. Jason turned to his lawyer, his lips moving but no sound came out. The lawyer only shook his head slightly. Carol lowered her gaze, her hands clasped together. The hearing ended quickly. No one applauded. No one showed anything excessive. But when people stood up, their eyes lingered on the defendant's table longer than before. Jason stood slowly. His shoulders sagged. The posture that once commanded now revealed emptiness. As he was led out, he still avoided looking toward the bench where Rachel and Lily were sitting. Rachel let out a soft breath, not because she had won, but because at last someone had named aloud what she had endured. I rested my hand on the back of the bench in front of me. This hearing did not save anyone. It did only one thing. It placed the truth in the middle of the crowd, where it could not be hidden, could not be twisted, and could not be taken back. The second peak had passed. The rest, I knew, would no longer be about words, but about consequences. The order was issued on a gray morning. I received a copy of the writ of restitution by email from Andrew, with the execution time attached. There was no long explanation. Everything had already run its full course through the paperwork. I arrived early, standing on the sidewalk across from the house that had once been called Jason's home. The windows were shut. The curtains hung crooked. There was no longer the warm light from previous evenings. I checked my watch, exactly on time. The sheriff's vehicle pulled up to the gate. 2 movers followed, working neatly without conversation. Andrew stepped out and nodded to me. No further questions were needed. The sheriff read the order, his voice even, loud enough to be clearly heard. The house became an address in a file. No longer a refuge, no longer private space, just property to be returned to the name on record. The door opened. Jason appeared. He wore a thin jacket, his hair uncombed. His eyes darted quickly as if searching for a delay. The sheriff raised his hand, signaling him to stop. "You are not allowed to go any further inside," he said. "The restraining order is still in effect." Jason gave a strained laugh. "I'm just taking personal items." The sheriff nodded and marked the permitted area. The movers went in with a list, working in order, logging each item allowed to be removed. No arguing, no negotiation. Carol appeared at the staircase, bag in hand. She looked around, then looked at me. Panic was plain in her eyes. When the sheriff restated the terms, Carol spun around and ran toward the back. No one chased her. There was no need. Jason stood in the living room, watching each box being carried out. Every movement felt like a line being crossed out. Tables, chairs, cabinets, decorations, things that once created a sense of ownership were now just objects to be categorized. He took another step forward, too close. The sheriff placed a hand on Jason's shoulder. "You are in violation." Jason turned, his voice bursting out. "I lived here for 5 years." The handcuffs snapped shut, the short final sound of metal. The second time, in front of strangers, in front of a house that no longer bore his name. "Violation of a protective order," the sheriff said. "You're coming with us." Jason did not resist. His shoulders slumped. His gaze lingered on the doorway where a life had just been lifted off its hinges. Carol did not return. An old car engine started at the end of the alley, then disappeared. The movers finished their work. They locked the door and sealed it according to procedure. The sheriff signed off. Andrew handed me the final copy. "Done," he said. I stepped into the empty house. The sound was different. Every footstep echoed clearly. No smell of alcohol. No overlapping voices. Just walls and floors returned to their original state. I opened a window. Air rushed in. Light spread out, even and cold. This was not a victory. This was things being returned to their proper places. The house did not choose sides. It stood only with the paperwork. And that day the paperwork had finished speaking. After the house fell silent again, everything unfolded in ways few people noticed. There were no more police cars, no new court appearances under the cameras, just doors quietly closing, one by one, in the natural order of life. News that Jason had lost his job arrived on a weekday afternoon. No one contacted me directly. Andrew forwarded a brief email from the insurance company where Jason worked. The wording was concise, neutral. The contract was terminated effective immediately upon the suspension of his professional license. No debate, no exceptions. Jason had once believed that the job was his lifeline. A packed schedule, glossy business cards, and long calls taken in the car. With a single confirmation line from the regulatory authority, it all vanished. The server locked his account. The company email went dark. The phone stopped ringing. The license revocation did not come from rumors. It came from a disciplinary record, from the video presented in court, from violations of ethical clauses that Jason himself had signed when entering the profession. The process was quiet, but final. A few days later, I received another notice. A tax review had been opened through a lawful referral mechanism, not because anyone reported him, but because mismatched data automatically triggered an audit. Reported commissions differed from actual income. Personal expenditures did not align with declared earnings. Things Jason had once dismissed returned right on schedule. Rachel asked me over the phone, "Did Dad do anything else?" "I didn't need to," I replied. "The system did its part." Jason began looking for a place to live. I knew because Rachel received a few awkward messages. He asked about cheap rentals, about borrowing a name for a lease, about delaying a deposit. The confidence was gone. Only scattered questions remained, like someone who had always lived in a furnished house and never learned how to find shelter. The results were the same everywhere. Application denied. Legal history unresolved. Income unstable. Brokers declined politely. Landlords went silent after reviewing documents. Appointments were canceled before they happened. Meanwhile, letters began to arrive. The first was handwritten, the strokes rigid. Jason wrote about pressure, about misunderstandings, about having rethought everything. He apologized for things going too far. Not a single line mentioned specific actions. Not one sentence accepted responsibility. Rachel finished reading and set the letter on the table. She didn't cry, didn't shake, just shook her head. The second letter was longer, typed, with a heading and signature. Jason wrote about family, about Lily, about wanting a fresh start. The wording was more polished, but the meaning was unchanged, asking for a chance, asking for a way back. I read it with Rachel, pointing out each section. "You see," I said, "he's asking for an opportunity, not forgiveness. Those are two different things." The third letter came from Carol. The language was evasive, half reproach, half lament. She wrote about age, about loneliness, about being pushed aside. No mention of alcohol, no mention of behavior, only her own losses. Rachel tore that letter up right in front of me. The scraps fell into the trash, neat as a decision fully made. Jason tried one last time. An email was sent through his lawyer, proposing a settlement in exchange for withdrawing certain civil claims. Andrew replied on my behalf. 3 words, no negotiation. After that, the silence stretched on. Not peace, but the void left when every exit has closed. I met Rachel one late afternoon. She looked different, shoulders looser, her voice no longer guarded. Lily ran circles in the yard, laughing loudly, no longer turning her head at every unfamiliar sound. "Dad," Rachel said, "everything ended in such a strange way." "Naturally," I replied, "when someone loses all their supports, the truth shows itself." Jason's collapse had no dramatic climax. It unfolded through emails, system notifications, and unanswered calls. No audience, no gloating. But each part of the life he built on dominance and disregard fell away in proper order. And in that silence, I saw clearly, some endings don't need loud noise. They only need time and everything that was already fully recorded. We returned to the house on a morning with soft sunlight, not to inventory it, but to live in it. Andrew had completed the handover procedures. The paperwork sat neatly in a file folder. No need to open it again. Rachel stepped in first. She stopped at the threshold and took a slow breath, not out of fear, but because this was the first time she had entered this place without watching someone else's expression. I let the mother and child go ahead, staying a few steps back. The first thing was opening all the windows. The air flowed in evenly. Light poured across the floor. The house changed immediately, not because of furniture, but because of how it was being used. Rachel started with the living room. She pulled chairs, shifted the table, and removed a few unnecessary things. Every movement was slow and deliberate. No one rushed her. No one commented. That afternoon, the painters arrived. Rachel chose a light color for her bedroom and a warm tone for Lily's room. There was little discussion. She studied the color chart briefly, then decided. As the old paint was covered, the new scent spread through the hallway. A simple change, but a clear one. Lily joined in her own way. I gave her a stack of paper and a box of colored pencils. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall, drawing nonstop. The house had sunlight. It had trees. It had 3 people holding hands. When she finished, Lily held it up for me to see, not asking if it was good or bad, just smiling. Rachel hung the drawing on the refrigerator without adjusting it or choosing another spot. She said it was easier to see there. The following days passed steadily. In the mornings, Rachel woke early to prepare meals. Lily dressed herself for school. The house had footsteps, running water, and doors opening and closing on time. Familiar sounds returned without effort. I realized I had begun to step back. I no longer stood in the middle of the room. I no longer asked about schedules. I no longer interfered in small things. I came when invited and left when everything was settled. My role gradually shifted from protector to observer. One evening, Rachel brought 2 cups of tea out to the porch. "Dad, stay for dinner?" "Another time," I said. "I'm heading home early today." She nodded without holding me back, without worry. Before I left, Lily ran out and gave me a brief hug. "Drive safely, Grandpa." I drove away, looking back at the house through the rearview mirror. The living room light was just bright enough. That space had returned to the people who truly needed it. Reclaiming a living space is not about erasing all old traces. It is about placing decision-making back into the hands of those who live there. And when that happened, I understood that my task was largely finished. The rest, they would right themselves in their own rhythm. We didn't celebrate. No one suggested it. No one brought it up. After everything, what needed to be done wasn't raising a glass, but cleaning up what had been finished. One weekend morning, I returned to the house. The weather was mild, the breeze light. I brought a folding ladder and a toolbox. The first task was removing the camera system. Each lens was carefully taken down, the wires coiled, and placed into a box. I worked slowly, not out of sentiment, but out of respect for why it had once existed. When the last one came down, the porch felt empty in a way that was quietly comforting. Rachel stood in the doorway, watching me work. "Are you done yet, Dad?" "Almost," I replied. "We won't need them anymore." She nodded, didn't ask anything else. We both understood. Some things are only meant to exist for a certain phase. In the afternoon, I drove Lily to the hardware store. She chose a light blue swing, not too big, not too flashy, just right for the backyard. We went home, dug holes, set the posts, and tightened the bolts. Lily stood nearby, handing me screws when asked, serious like an adult. When the swing was hung, Lily climbed onto it. Her feet pushed lightly. The ropes creaked softly. She smiled, a smile that didn't need to check anyone's reaction. I stepped back a few paces, leaving enough space between us for a child to grow. Rachel brought out some water. "Are you tired, Dad?" "No," I said. "This is easy." We sat for a while, not saying much. The wind stirred the leaves, the steady sound of the swing. These were sounds that had once disappeared in that house. Now they were back, as naturally as if they had never left. Before leaving, I walked around the yard, looked again at the windows, the steps, the walkway, not looking for faults, not checking anything, just looking to acknowledge. This place had changed hands in the truest sense, not on paper, but in how people lived. Rachel walked me to the gate. "Dad," she said softly, "thank you for stopping at the right time." I understood what she meant. Stopping isn't giving up. Stopping is knowing when to step back so someone else can step forward. On the drive home, I thought about everything that had happened. Nothing occurred by accident. Every consequence followed from a choice. Cruelty can flare up fast, but it burns down the one who uses it. Preparation is different. It's quiet, persistent, and it stays until the end. I parked the car and turned off the engine. A chapter had closed. No need for flowery conclusions. Just remember one thing. Cruelty burns fast. Preparation lasts. I'm not telling this story to seek sympathy, nor to boast that I won. Some things, if left unsaid, will keep happening under other roofs, to other fathers, other children, and people will keep telling themselves it's just a private family matter. I used to believe that. I chose silence, chose distance, chose to reassure myself that my child would be fine. But the truth is, abuse doesn't stop because people hope it will. It stops when someone steps forward and calls it by its proper name. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I only did what a father should have done sooner. Prepared carefully enough, took the right path, stood in the right place, and stopped at the right time. The cost of underestimating a father isn't in the courtroom, isn't in a house being taken back, and isn't in the collapse that follows. It lies here. When everything is over, those who caused harm must live with knowing they were seen through, documented and held accountable, not by rage, but by truth. If you're in a similar situation, remember one thing. Silence is not always endurance, but when it's time to speak, speak the right way. If this story touched you, even a little, leave a period in the comments, so I know there are still people out there who understand what it feels like to be pushed to the margins inside your own family. And if you want to keep listening to stories where truth is spoken at the right time, in the right place, follow the channel. I'll be here continuing to tell them. No noise, no embellishment, just what happened and what needs to be said.